Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. After last week's cold and frosty period, the pendulum has now swung back the other way in quite spectacular style. It's unsettled, mild. In fact, we've had 2 named storms in successive days. So how will things develop as we go through the next 2 weeks? Well, as usual, I'm going to start by taking a look at the view across Europe and the North Atlantic. The animation runs from 18 GMT, Tuesday the 23rd. At the outset, as I've hinted, it's a very unsettled looking picture. The deep area of low pressure there is Storm Jocelyn, and it's bringing disruptive conditions to parts of the UK, very strong winds and heavy outbreaks of rain. As I run the sequence, it pulls away, but we're left in a westerly flow, so it's quite changeable, further rain at times. But look to the south because high pressure starts to build, and I think that heralds the start of a change. Drier conditions, especially in southern and central regions. Running this forwards, what we see is the rain increasingly becomes restricted to the northwest. Not entirely. Some outbreaks push southeastwards, although I think they will become increasingly light and fragmented as they do that. Towards the end there, the high pressure stays to the south. Not a great deal of change. Here's the jet stream profile and upper air temperatures, so about 1,500 metres above sea level. The mottled shading shows where the jet stream is tracking. The UK is somewhere around there, so it's making a beeline for us to begin with. And as I run this, it stays on a similar track for the first few days, but later on there are indications of it beginning to migrate northwards, so high pressure, as I've suggested, having more of a say in matters. And with winds coming in from the southwest, there is some very warm air approaching at times. How does all this correspond to temperatures down at the ground level? Forecast maximums here on Wednesday the 24th, 10s, 11s in central and eastern parts of England, a little bit cooler as you head into Northern Ireland and Scotland, but it's mild really. Overnight lows, this has just been used for illustrative purposes. It's on Friday the 26th, possibly a touch of ground frost in a number of parts of the UK. But on the whole, I think the frost risk through the first week will be less than the average for the time of year. It won't be completely frost-free, but certainly it doesn't look particularly cold through the nights either. Going forwards to Friday the 26th, temperatures have dipped a little bit at this point, so one of the cooler days through the first week, according to the GFS, 7s or 8s there in the south, close to the average. Forwards to Sunday, and they've picked up once more, 11s, 12 Celsius, so mild or very mild, even in the north there, temperatures generally close to or above the average for much of the time. Now, it has been extremely windy recently with the 2 named storms, and on the Mogreps G plot here, which shows forecast wind gusts for London, this is just at the start of a period, so it's Storm Jocelyn which is responsible for these gusts of around 50 miles an hour or maybe a little bit lower, and then they dip sharply. The individual lines show the forecast from different members in the ensemble, and if they're all close together it means there's good consistency, good agreement between them. It's windier again around the 25th and 26th, but not as windy as it was at the start of a period, so up to about 30-35 miles an hour. In the days which follow, though, those winds would appear to be dropping away substantially. A much calmer picture developing as high pressure builds up from the south. Rainfall, days 0 to 5, the aggregate forecasts here from ECM and GFS. Fairly typical profiles on both of them. They're consistent. The heaviest rain affecting the northwest, the yellow shading there, the orange shading in western Scotland. That's where the really large amounts of rain are being forecast. A lot drier though in central and eastern counties of England than it has been certainly in the last few days. Single figures there, single figure totals, and those are measured in millimetres of course. Now moving forwards to the 0 to 10 day period, the general pattern remains very similar. The totals have continued stacking up in western Scotland, in the northwest generally, so the reds there are pointing towards some very, very large amounts of rain through the 0 to 10 day period. But if you look down into central and eastern England, the numbers haven't really changed at all from days 0 to 5. indicating that days 5 to 10 are likely, according to these two deterministic model runs, to bring mostly dry conditions to much of the south and the east. Now, in more general terms, do the deterministic models agree with each other, or have they all gone off in different directions towards the end of the first week? Here is the GFS, Tuesday the 30th, high pressure there being a big player, as I've already discussed. The Canadian model, high pressure may be centred a little bit further north, but it's a similar picture. There are differences, but high pressure having a lot to say. On the ICON model, it looks like there's an area of low pressure there, but the general theme is for high pressure to be building from the south. Likewise with the European ECM, there could be some very mild air. In fact, if this one's correct, being pulled up from the southwest. Finally, the UK Met Office Global, it's a similar story. Probably some rain there across the northern half of the UK at this point, but don't focus on the details. It's the general pattern that is important when looking this far ahead, and that is for high pressure to the south to be influencing the UK's weather quite a lot. So putting it all together, dry conditions look likely in southern and central regions. The risk of rain is higher in the north, especially the northwest. It's not cold. Now, does that general theme continue as we head through the second week? Trends and probabilities at this range, of course, not details in any sense of the word. So it's just looking for, is it going to be warmer or colder than average, wetter or drier? Here is the 16-day GEFS plot for London. 850 HPA temperatures across the top, and the signal is reasonably clear. There is a big spread developing there, some much colder runs in the mix and some very mild ones, but averaging it out, the thick purple line, the ensemble mean, is often above a 30-year norm. It is dipping down later on though, so perhaps the chance of colder conditions increasing a little bit towards the end of the second week there. All in all though, at least at the 850 HPA level, it is appearing to be quite mild. That's the favoured outcome. In terms of rain, some spikes show up there. So there's a relatively low risk of rain. I don't think it's going to be completely dry though, and perhaps later on the chance of it turning wetter is starting to increase. Just looking at the snow row across the very bottom, it shows the number of runs in the ensemble on a given day which are forecasting snow to fall. The maximum value it can have is 33, and towards the end there it's reaching 5. So it's a low risk of snow in southern Britain, not completely out of the question, but just a chance there if some of those colder runs actually turn out to be correct, but I wouldn't be backing them. Here are the 2-metre temperatures for London in the data table format. So maximums here and minimums. Lots of yellow showing up through the second week. Those are mild or very mild ones. Maximums between 11 and 15. Light green, 6 and 10. Closer to average, but a little bit on the mild side even so. It's the dark greens which we should be looking for colder conditions, and that the amount of dark green increases later on, but it's staying in a minority in those individual columns. The overnight lows, well, just to assess the frost risk really, there is a reasonable amount of dark green, so as I say, those are between 1 and 5 Celsius. They could be cold enough to give a ground frost. Not much blue at all though, just a little bit there at the start and then once more at the end, and those are the runs which would point towards air frost, so temperatures below 0 Celsius through the night. Up to Manchester, similar really. The cooling off is more marked here than it was on the London plot towards the end of the second week. Also there are more spikes there along the bottom, so a greater risk of rain, and the snow row values are a little higher. So general theme is very similar though to London. 2-metre temperatures for Manchester, looks mild, or rather mild at least. Something of a cooling trend there, later on more dark green appearing. The overnight lows following a similar pattern with the amount of blue beginning to tick up towards the end there, so perhaps a greater risk of frost later on. Up to Glasgow to complete the journey northwestwards. Temperatures on the upper part of the graph here are fluctuating around that 30-year average, which is shown by the thick black line, so it's definitely looking cooler here than it is in the than it was on the Manchester and London plots. In fact, there is more of a signal there for these values to be falling below the 30-year average towards the end of the second week than on either of the other two charts. In terms of rain and snow, well, quite a few spikes there. It is quite a wet picture, as I showed with those two aggregate forecasts from the GFS and ECM. Some high rain totals in Western Scotland, and I think that's been reflected here. Glasgow is probably not going to be the wettest part, but still it's a much wetter picture than further south and east especially. The snow row across the bottom, the values a little higher, reaching 9 on one of the days, but not very high, so a chance of snow, but nothing to write home about at the moment. 2 metre temperature data tables for Glasgow. The trend is towards cooler conditions later on. There's more dark green appearing, but still probably mild through the first part of the second week, for most of the time at least. The overnight lows, a greater chance of frost here than further south. In fact, it becomes a lot more significant later on, with the majority of runs indicating temperatures at the 2 metre level below freezing on some of the nights. All in all though, quite a mixed picture, mild conditions being favoured in most of the UK, the chance perhaps of it turning colder later on and maybe more changeable too. Here is the GEFS 850 HPA temperature tracker table. It's showing the number of runs on recent updates which are forecasting values below minus 14 Celsius and below minus 9 Celsius. The maximum it can take is 31, and it's not really indicating many runs bringing in deep cold. There are 4 on the latest update there, the 00Z update on Tuesday the 23rd, but it's a small minority. There is not a signal here for very cold weather to return, at least to the south. Moving to the opposite end of the spectrum, this is showing the number of runs on recent GEFS updates, which are bringing in exceptionally mild upper level air to the London area. The numbers are small, but I think if any of these runs were to verify, we could be challenging date temperature records. Something to keep an eye on. Moving on to rainfall from the ECM ensemble. Each one of these shows the percentage chance of 5 millimetres or more rain falling on a given day. It's the first 3 days of the second week of a forecast period. So the orange shading very clearly there highlights the wettest conditions being focused on Western Scotland. Much drier as you head further south and east. In fact, a very low percentage chance of significant rain in much of southern, central and eastern England. Forwards to the following 3 days, and the general pattern is similar, but the blue shading there is spreading further south and east. It's pointing towards more changeable conditions, maybe returning across the UK, a greater risk of rain making it down into the southeast, but still clearly much wetter in the west and the northwest. The 10-day GEFS mean surface level pressure plot. It's not great if it's cold weather that you're hoping for. This is, of course, generated by averaging out all of the individual runs, so it does mask a range of scenarios, but still high pressure looks like sitting to the south of the UK, more of an Atlantic influence in the north. That is never really a very cold pattern. In fact, it does open up the door for very mild air, which I was pointing out earlier, to make its way up from the southwest across the UK. There is always the chance that if this high pressure can build far enough north, we can end up with cold and frosty conditions, but at the moment that doesn't seem to be the form horse, at least not through the early part of the second week up to this date, the 2nd of February. Perhaps in the days which follow there is some sign of a downwards trend in temperatures, as I discussed earlier, but all in all that does not look good for cold weather. The mean surface level pressure data table, so going through the second week, also shows high pressure having a good deal of influence through the first few days. The green in the columns increases later on, as does the blue. Those are runs which are going for lower pressure. So once more, signalling a possible trend there towards more changeable weather later on. But all in all, a lot of high pressure influence through the first few days at least. So to summarise, week 1, after an unsettled start, high pressure begins to build from the south, so rain increasingly becomes focused on the northwest, with drier conditions developing more frequently elsewhere. Temperatures often close to or above the average, but there could be some patchy frost. Not a great deal though. Week 2, early on, the rain risk is mostly in the northwest, but later it could become more generally changeable. Temperatures above the average through the first few days, perhaps dipping later on. So there we have it. High pressure building from the south. It's not my favourite winter weather pattern. Nonetheless, I think quite a lot of people will be grateful for it because of the quieter and drier conditions which it implies. Now, before going, let me just say that I've been rebuilding my recording studio, so if there are any glitches today in the video, I will be working on ironing them out in the coming days. But do let me know if you notice any particular problems. Thank you for watching, and as ever, if you enjoyed this video and found it useful, then please consider hitting the like button. Also, subscribing to the channel if you've not done so already. Don't forget as well to keep up to date with the day-to-day weather developments by checking out the TheWeatherOutlook.com website. Thanks now. Bye.